My name is Randy Bigley. Joining me on the podcast right now from Ohio Mutual Insurance Group, Todd Boyer. Hello, Todd.
How are you, Randy?
I'm doing great. We're talking about the beautiful day out there today, and
Absolutely.
it's springtime finally, I think.
You know, it's the best time of the year. Everybody's in a good mood. Everything's turning green.
Right, right.
But there are some reasons to be a little cautious about springtime in Ohio.
It's the severe weather out
Yeah.
there. Yeah, it can be. It's tornado season, basically. Yeah.
Tornado season starts here in the spring, so when you have those changes in temperature and you have the increased humidity in the air, it invariably leads to some severe weather. So those of us in the insurance industry, we spend most of the spring and some of the summer with our fingers crossed.
Sure. Yeah.
Knocking on wood, because we
Right.
know that probably more than anything else, the one factor that impacts our financial success as a company is weather, and that's the one thing that we have very little control over. So we pay very close attention to it.
Yeah. You get those strong winds. You get roof damage and stuff that happens a lot. Shingles off roofs or whatever happens quite frequently with just these storms coming. It does take
yeah, and sometimes the storms can be very large, very kind of dramatic, and sometimes there's very expensive storms that come through in a very small or narrow area. We just, within the last week or so, had a hailstorm that came through an area down near Lancaster. Not a huge area geographically, but we have a lot of business down there, a lot of properties, farms, and homes that we insure. And hail is a very destructive weather occurrence, and it has what we call a long tail in the business, which means not all the claims come in right at once. There's things that are obvious about, hey, I've got holes in my siding, or I've got dents that I can see on my car that was parked out in the driveway. But you might not notice the roof damage until 6 months later, when somebody gets up there and takes a look at it, or something falls off the roof and somebody says, wait a minute, you've got some roof damage after it gets inspected. So sometimes those hailstorms are kind of the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah, sure.
So to speak.
Not only tornadoes, but straight line winds are dangerous too. You hear a lot of damage that comes through from straight line winds. They said no tornado. What it was just heavy straight line winds.
Yeah. So, tornadoes obviously are very dramatic. They make great news. They look scary. They sound scary. The destruction that they leave in their wake is, just incredible sometimes. Sometimes straight line winds get overlooked, but they are no less destructive.
Right.
And if you think back to the derecho that came through the Midwest, started out Illinois area and came clear across Indiana, Ohio, and all the way into, I think, Maryland is where it finally kind of petered out.
Yeah.
It covered 700 miles. It was as wide as the state of Ohio, and it had winds up in excess of 90 miles an hour. $2.9 billion in damage, 22 people killed. There wasn't a tornado amongst it. It was all straight line winds. So that shows just how dangerous straight line winds can be.
I remember I was working at the radio stations in Marion when that hit, and I'm on my way home, so I live in the Lexington area, and I remember the whole way home, it was just crazy. I mean, the whole entire drive, it looked like everything was down.
I was working here in Bucyrus, and I live in the Columbus area, and somebody stuck their head in a meeting that I was in, and they said, hey, you might want to think about leaving for home now. I was like, well, why? And they're like, well, have you seen the weather? And I just hadn't had a chance to look at it that day. And I looked at the radar and went, holy moly, what is that?
Yeah.
And so a couple of us who lived in the Columbus area, we kind of jumped in our cars and took off, but not soon enough because it landed as I was en route.
Oh, wow.
And there were, I'm going through farmland through Crawford and Marion County and Morrow County and Delaware County, and there were trash cans and everything but cows kind of blown across the road, and I finally got home, and it took me hours. Because, the lights are down, traffic is snarled. But by the time I got to Columbus, the last 2 or 3 miles to my home took me the longest period of time. And then, of course, power was out for a number of days, and all that damage was pretty significant.
It was
straight
crazy.
line winds can be extraordinarily damaging. Tornadoes in Ohio, we average about 19 a year. And it's kind of hard to predict kind of what's going to happen. 2020 we had 24. Last year we had 33. But by this time last year we hadn't had any yet. All of those 33 took place after the middle of June. So you just never know. We even had some into December, which are historically rare, but unfortunately becoming not quite so rare, and more December tornadoes are showing up.
Another thing that bad weather brings, I like to call fly-by-night contractors that kind of prey on these people that have damage to their home. That these people that might show up and you never hear from them again if they take your money.
Well, exactly. Yeah. So the people who have bad motives generally try to follow the money. And we're hearing more and more cases of people who saw a lot of the money that the government was throwing around in the wake of the pandemic and found ways to grab more than their fair share. And this happens all the time in the wake of storms. Everybody's heard of storm chasers, and that's exactly what they do. These are contractors who will follow the news, and they'll see where a storm is because they know that there is work to be done, but there's also money to be had.
Sure. Yeah.
And homeowners, property owners need to exercise really great care and caution in the wake of a storm when they have property damage, because those storm chasers know that there's a huge demand for anyone, and if you're a property owner, you're just looking for somebody who can fix your roof, somebody who can repair that damage, somebody who can make you feel secure in your home again. So they understand the pressure that a homeowner might be under, and they prey upon that. And oftentimes, they will come in, and they're very sophisticated sometimes. Oftentimes, we've seen instances where a contractor from out of state will come in and will make a deal with a local contractor who has a local presence. They'll slap that sign on their truck, even though that truck has out of state license plates, to give themselves an air of, oh, I'm local, or I'm legitimate, when they aren't.
Yeah.
And so what will happen is they'll come in, they'll use high pressure tactics, they'll try to get paid up front, they'll use all kinds of excuses about why they need the money early. And there's some tips that homeowners need to be aware of in the wake of a storm, because they're going to be approached by people more than likely. So I got a couple tips just that people should keep in mind on this. First of all, don't ever pay a contractor in full or sign a completion certificate saying that the work is done until you're sure it's done and you're sure it's been done to current building code. So,
that's important. Yes.
Because you as a property owner are responsible for making sure your property is up to building code. And if your property is repaired or updated, you're responsible then at that point to bring it up to what the current code is. Now, if you're making changes to your property voluntarily, not in the wake of a storm, there's oftentimes coverage in your insurance policy for your home or your business that will pay whatever it takes to bring your damage up to current code in excess of what it is to just repair whatever damage you've suffered.
Okay.
But in this case, where there is a disaster, oftentimes work gets done. It's made to look as good as it takes to make somebody feel like it's done, but it's really not up to code. And then the building owner or the homeowner finds out they have additional costs after the fact when it's not up to code.
Yeah.
So make sure that it's up to code before you sign anything saying the work's done. Don't ever sign a contract that has blanks in it. Don't ever let the contractor pressure you in any way to sign something. If you don't want to contract with this guy, if you got a bad feeling, trust your intuition, get references, and by all means, check the references. It's too easy sometimes for someone to say, yeah, here's a list of people you can call, and you think, okay, well, if they give me the list, I'm going to assume that they're probably legit. Oftentimes, they know that most of the time, someone's not going to go to the trouble of calling somebody, so check the references that you get. And again, if you have any reason to be concerned, or if you have any pause, you're better off to wait to get that damage taken care of by somebody that you know and you can trust, rather than someone who you're not entirely sure of.
Okay.
Make sure everything's in writing, and make sure before you submit any documents to your insurance company for repairs or for reimbursement, that you understand what you're submitting, you understand what's going on, and make sure you're working in partnership with your insurance agent, because your agent's going to be very aware of what should be the right kind of cost for the kind of damage that you've suffered. They're going to be knowledgeable about local contractors, about what kind of processes sound like they're probably legitimate and what sounds a little bit shady. So they're going to be a very good resource and advisor for you as a homeowner who's trying to recover from storm damage.
Okay. Wow. There are lots of things to think about that we don't during that time when you're pressured, you're worried, like, how am I going to get this fixed, and you just you don't think. Some people don't think, do they?
Yeah, you get under that pressure, you feel that you've got you got damage, you're trying to get, that taken care of as quickly as you can, and sometimes that can encourage you to do something that in retrospect you feel, wow, that was really foolish, I should have been a little more careful. And people who chase storms, they use that pressure to their advantage.
It's sad that there's people like that, isn't there? There really is.
There always have been,
Yeah.
and there always will be. So
Yeah.
the way to protect yourself is just to be vigilant and be very deliberate, and to make sure that you are listening to that little voice inside your head. And if something says this doesn't seem right, then back off, get some additional advice, get another outside perspective, check another resource, get another quote,
Yeah.
make sure that everything feels comfortable before you sign anything or you send money anybody's direction.
Get some references too, what other jobs they've done.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
probably the best thing that you can do. And if somebody coming in from out of state is likely not to have legitimate
Yeah.
references that are local,
Right.
and that should be a red flag.
There you go. Yeah, if they don't, exactly, they don't have references available, don't, stay away, right?
Yeah, it's just something you should be cautious of, absolutely.
Well, Todd, anything else you want to add before we call it?
Well, there's a couple things that are happening within the insurance industry
Sure.
right now. There's some federal legislation that Ohio Mutual is supporting and encouraging our representatives in Washington to support. It's been proposed and pushed by the insurance industry, and we call it building resiliency.
Okay.
So if you think about what happens lots of times, you get a storm that comes through, there's a hurricane, there's a tornado, something, and so FEMA comes in, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and they have dollars to help the community recover, individuals recover, and they rebuild things. And oftentimes those storms happen more than once in similar areas. We have Tornado Alley, we have coastal areas that are constantly susceptible to hurricanes. So you can get into a cycle where the storm knocks it down, insurance and the federal government comes in with money, build it up, next storm comes through, knocks it down,
Right.
and you get in this cycle. And so what the insurance industry has been working on is helping to kind of change the dialogue a little bit and saying, why don't we put a little bit of money up front? And let's see if we can build our buildings a little stronger, have more thoughtful building codes, and make sure that they're enforced so that when the storm comes through, the damage is not as much.
Sure.
And then people's lives aren't upended for such a long time. The damage and the cost for taxpayers in addition to the homeowner is less. And you end up having much less disruption overall. And our studies have shown that for every dollar that's spent on the front end, saves $11 after the storm.
Wow. Okay.
So anybody
Yeah.
would love to have that kind of return on
Right.
investment.
Oh, heck yeah. Yeah.
And
yeah.
it's certainly a long game.
Yeah.
There's a lot of property out there. We have to, do this one community at a time and one building at a time and one property owner at a time. But as we get our building stock nationally up to code with strong codes that are aware of and responsive to the weather in that area, then we'll start to see those costs shift where we're putting more money on the front end to prevent damage or minimize damage, and less on the back end to clean up, rebuild, and then have us go through this cycle over and over again.
I know they've done that with earthquakes, with buildings. They've made them more earthquake-proof, in California and all that. I know
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't think that maybe in Ohio that wouldn't we
Yeah.
have to worry about some of these things, but we do have earthquakes in Ohio.
We do.
We have fault lines. We have mines old mines in Ohio, and so there's specialized coverage for mine subsidence when some of those shafts will collapse in certain areas that have old mines. And you wouldn't think, well, why should I worry about hurricanes in Ohio? But if you think about the way insurance works, we're all sharing the cost for damage
Yeah.
amongst all of the people who are paying premiums into the insurance company's coffers. So if Ohio Mutual, we have coastal risks in New England. So when they have a storm come through and suffer damage, the money to make those people whole is coming out of the same pot that would be used to make somebody who has a tornado in Ohio whole after that damage. So, we all need to pay attention to, climate change and the risks that come with weather, and we're increasingly living as a culture in areas that are more and more prone for storms. More people on the coast, more people in the south, where a lot of tornadoes are frequent. So we have to be aware that there's a cost to that, and then we're all sharing that cost. So everybody kind of has a stake in the effort to try to make our buildings that we live in as resilient as possible.
Very good. If someone's interested in getting a hold of you, how can they do that? Or Ohio Mutual Insurance Group?
Well,
And it's not-
first of all, if you're a customer of Ohio Mutual, the best person to get in touch with is your local agent. Because that person is an expert. They know your area, they know your coverage, they know your needs, and they're your best first stop for information. But if you want to check out Ohio Mutual, it's omig.com on the internet, and you can find a wealth of information there and additional contacts as well.
Todd, thank you so much for that great information.
Randy, enjoyed it.
Hopefully we won't have to worry about that this year, but who knows? You never know.
You never know, and it's just good to be prepared ahead of time.
Thank you. Thank you so much.